The digital transition. The Digital Transition, a podcast series created to assist those tasked with implementing digital strategies, where we will share our knowledge and experiences to support you in your transition. Welcome to the Digital Transition, podcast number 16. I'm your host, Nathan Hildebrandt, and today I'm talking to Nathan Jones from Turner and Townsend. He's a specialist in data security, and I thought this topic is a critical one to cover alongside our previous episodes as we've been talking about creating digital asset information. Now, there's little benefit of creating digital assets if they're too secure that no one can actually access them easily. But also on the other side, you don't want your facility information accessible by someone that should not have that information at all. Thanks very much for taking the time to talk to me today, Nathan.
No problem.
Now, for the listeners that aren't aware of who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And I think that your journey into this realm is quite interesting for people that are within the AEC industry.
Yeah, sure. So Nathan Jones, I'm an associate director with Turner and Townsend in the UK, and I head up our internal security team. So I have a team of specialists who work for me, and we cover cyber, physical, and data security. My journey into T&T is a little bit different. So I'm ex-military. I was in the British Army for 23 years as a communication specialist, basically spending lots of time all over the world in lots of different places, collaborating with other countries, other nations, other forces, predominantly in a secret or a top secret environment. I left the military in May 2015 and was basically snapped up by Turner and Townsend quite quickly, as conveniently when I left the military, PAS 1192 Part 5, which is the UK standard on BIM security, had just been released. So essentially, I was brought into T&T to look at BIM security, but over the last 4 years, that has grown from just BIM security to a holistic security offering.
Because the listeners probably have already listened to my talk with George about a month ago now, and George did a good job in explaining, I guess, the services that they provided in terms of project management. One thing that I think would really be of interest to the listeners would be the services that you offer in regards to data security or security, as you kind of mentioned just then, that it's actually becoming quite a bit broader, and hopefully if this podcast starts to get exciting, maybe I'll need to engage you guys to provide me some personal security, maybe, I don't know.
So interesting question. So security needs to be looked at holistically. So it's pointless having 12-foot fences with razor wire and CCTV cameras and all the rest of it if your cybersecurity is really, really poor. And it's pointless having fantastic cybersecurity with lots of different solutions and firewalls and protecting your electronic information if you leave paperwork lying around. The way you remove and destroy information is really, really weak. Whether that's an internal threat from FM staff, cleaners, whatever, who can quite easily come into a building and steal information, or whether that's just information that is produced into a hard copy left lying around. So it really needs to be an holistic kind of point of view. And if you look at any standards, so take ISO 27001, take the new BIM ISOs, which some are currently in development, it's not just about electronic security. It is very much around an holistic approach.
As part of your introduction and to yourself, and I guess the reason why you were, snapped up so quickly by Turner and Townsend, obviously that you mentioned about PAS 1192.5, and obviously the purpose of that standard is to set along the other 1192 British publicly available standards. Now, at a high level, obviously you just kind of covered it in some ways and saying how that British standard's kind of being converted into the ISO standard. But can you describe at a high level what that standard is supposed to cover?
In terms of the PAS?
Yeah, yeah. I guess we could talk about it at a PAS level, or we could jump a step and move straight into where it's heading with the ISO, because obviously at the moment it's still a PAS or a British standard, and they are currently working on releasing it as an ISO. I think at the end of next year or the end of this year.
Yeah, so I think it's probably worth going through the whole journey because I'm reasonably close to it. So when the PAS was launched, I guess it was around May 2015, something like that. What it does is it kind of points you to ask some quite detailed questions. It doesn't tell you how to do anything. It doesn't tell you really to do anything. It just kind of advises you to say, actually, if you work in this environment, so from a UK point of view, the PAS is very much focused on our critical national infrastructure, of which there are 13 areas. Crowded spaces, those sort of organisations or areas where people can convene, whether that's a nuclear power plant or whether that's a concert hall. And the PAS is very much around, okay, so if you're about to build or renovate an asset that falls within one of these areas, you might want to be thinking about this. And it points you towards really looking at how you're going to collaborate before you collaborate and who you're going to collaborate with. What supply chain is going to be procured and how you're going to procure it, and how do you de-risk the supply chain having a breach, either from a data security or from a cyber security. It points you towards having a strategy so the organization understands what is sensitive about the information you're going to be collating through the project or program and how you're going to be treating it. And it kind of spits you out in the end of with a strategy, a plan of how that strategy is going to be supported across the organization, and a document of what sensitive information is going to be collated and how that's going to be treated. And at a very, very high level, that is it.
Yep.
In terms of the ISO, so interestingly, I'm on the UK panel for the replacement for 1192 Part 5, so ISO 19650 Part 5.
Yep.
And it's now sitting in final UK draft. We had our final meeting this week, and it goes to the international board in Norway next month, of which I will be attending. And ultimately, for very good reasons, they're very similar. There is some stuff that was in the PAS that will not go into the ISO at UK government request. But the ISO follows the same kind of journey in terms of understanding what you're going to be working on. So it tells you to go through a triage process, which is massively important.
Yep.
And then it takes you on a journey of how you're going to be looking after that information. And it hints quite strongly to looking at it from a holistic point of view. So going back to what I said earlier, it discusses how you're physically going to protect this information, how you're going to protect it from a cyber point of view, and how you're going to protect it from a data security point of view. It doesn't go into how that should be done technically, for good reason, because every single client is different, every single client's risk appetite is different. So it doesn't tell you how or what to use. It just kind of points you down this journey of informing you that you should really be thinking about this, and this is what we recommend.
Yeah, and I guess the problem with the standard also is with technology changing as quickly as it is, it'd be kind of a dangerous thing to do, to kind of go into the detail as to how when things are moving so quickly as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I work quite closely with our cyber team and with most of our clients. I get quite heavily involved with a lot of the cyber protection to kind of put that ring fence around the information first. And there's new technology coming out almost on a weekly basis, and the stuff that can be done now within the cyber world is very, very powerful. But it needs to be thought about, because the clients can be in danger, organisations can be in danger of just throwing money at the problem, and actually there is more often than not some very low-hanging fruits that can be dealt with quite cheaply and quite quickly, yet have a massive effect on the security of the information you're going to be collaborating with.
No, that's interesting. Now you've got me really interested. It's almost like reading the cover of a book, what you've just put in front of me. But, the standard's been in place now in the UK for, just around the 4 years mark, and you've been part of that process in terms of assisting clients. Now, have you seen a lot of clients actually have data off a BIM project actually get to a level yet in that 4 year period that has actually needed this level of security or protection, or is it just at this point in time been setting the security policies in place so that when they actually have that information, they'll be able to act in that way?
So that's a really, really good question, because, as I'm sure you'll be aware, the UK mandated BIM level 2 on all UK public projects and programs a couple of years ago.
Yeah, 2016.
And we hadn't seen a massive increase in the whole BIM security, but in the last 12 months that has changed.
Yeah,
and I think that's because people's knowledge of BIM and the processes has changed. What we were seeing is very much clients coming in at the EIR level, and it was very much about telling the suppliers, so designers and tier one contractors, what they actually wanted, missing out crucial steps like the OIR, which actually is an internal organizational document that quite clearly clarifies and explains what information is going to be collated and why. Yeah. And this is where the kind of project in the asset world were quite blinkered, but are now starting to look wider. So an example in the UK would be, we have two pieces of legislation that were pulled in last year, one about personal data and one about cyber attack on certain organisations. And very high level, if there's a breach of personal information and the organisation hasn't put in the necessary policies, protocols, and technical solutions to protect that personal information, then it's a minimum of a £17 million fine, or maximum of or maximum of 4% global turnover. Now, the 4% global turnover can be quite weighty for large organisations. From a cyber point of view, within certain organisations, within certain suppliers of public services, if the operations of that service, so take an airport, for example, if certain systems in the airport is hacked by a cyber attack, and that airport has not put in its necessary processes, protocols, and technical solutions to prevent that, then it's a £17 million fine. What that is meant as is projects and programs need to understand exactly what information is being captured and why, and whether that's just from a sensitive asset information or whether that links into asset information. If for example, the project or the program is procuring properties, which we can do in the UK, we can, as long as it's not Crown estate, we can mandatory buy people's houses as long as it goes through Parliament. So if as part of the project of the program, we're gonna buy and then knock down 100 houses, for example, as part of that project or program, we will be collating a significant amount of personal data. Homeowners, who has the mortgage, is there any special requirements on the house in terms of disabilities, etc., etc. So as part of the project, as part of a BIM project, we're now collating personal information. On the other side of the fence, in terms of a cyber point of view, if the project is working on assets that could affect the operational or operations of the asset from a cyber point of view, and if the project, for example, is to replace some runway lighting or some control systems on a rail network or something like that, then the information required to collate as part of the BIM project gets into the wrong hands and provides that organisation, that bad person, with enough information to commence or to carry out a cyber attack, then the organisation who owns the asset is then subject to a £17 million fine. So we've seen, probably quite fortuitously, we've seen UK legislation from a personal data and from a cyber protection point of view actually start to help the BIM security journey.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple of things there. One is UK legislation helping the BIM security journey, and one is actually the clients becoming more aware of the sensitivities of the information that they could be producing. So we are seeing an increase and a demand on our team, or on my team's skills.
So the interesting approach I guess I could take out of this is, has this standard in many ways actually improved the awareness of companies just purely about the way in which they handle data security as a whole, even taking a step back from the whole concept of built assets and actually thinking about the data security of their business overall? Is it, could people take it that way as well?
I think what it has done, because it doesn't tell you what to do and how to do it, understandably. But what it has done is it's raised questions. So I meet with a lot of clients who said, yeah, we've read through the paths, but it doesn't really tell us anything. It's like, well, it's not going to. But very, very early on in the paths, it gives you a triage, which is a very, very simple flow diagram. And if you follow that flow diagram, it will spit you up into one of four areas. One area being you're not so sensitive, but just have a think about how you're going to share your information. To the other end of the spectrum of you're a really sensitive asset, you're engaging with other really sensitive assets, you need to employ specialist people who can come and help you do X, Y, Z. Yep. So I think what a lot of people haven't done previously is actually read through the paths and understood it, and then gone through the triage process to find out how sensitive they are, because a lot of organizations don't actually understand how sensitive the project or program could be. So, for example, if you're carrying out some roadworks and that roadwork is not a particular trunk road, it's not a major junction, it's not a major artery, etc., then that's probably not a sensitive project. But if as part of that roadworks you're going to be touching one of the main fibres that link the entire UK, or one of the main power cables, if you're going to be touching that, i.e. moving it or whatever, or even just exposing the information, the fact that it's there, then you've taken a project that's not sensitive to a project that's very sensitive. So it's really just educating the clients of saying, well, actually what you're doing and what you want to achieve in terms of your project is not sensitive, but the information of what you're going to be exposing is very sensitive. There was quite a famous drawing now, because it's open source, of a major railhead in London, where frankly it was over modelled, and this was down to supply chains and down to designers just showing off, trying to show how good they were in terms of creating quite detailed 3D designs. But what it also exposed is some stuff as part of that railhead and as part of the London Underground. It exposed some information and some quite detailed models of tunnels and other bits and pieces that the UK government really did not want to be exposed. So what the designer was doing was working on a new junction, on a new platform in a railway station. Mm. Not too sensitive. That there are some isms associated with that, but not that sensitive. But by virtue of them over-modelling the project, doing a little bit of showing off and putting all of that onto open source, they then compromised some really sensitive information and some sensitive assets that frankly had nothing to do with what they were achieving. So the paths kind of get the client and the asset owner who was ultimately responsible for this to start thinking about not only their assets, but also any of the assets that may be touched either physically or electronically, and that could just be about a data sharing piece, whether that's geo information, whether that's structural information, whether that's survey information. That information may expose sensitive data. So the PAS definitely starts to point you down asking these questions. what hasn't been the case is people haven't read the PAS either at all or in any real detail to furnish them with the questions that they then can go out to organisations who deal with BIM security and kind of say, we think we've got a problem. What do you think? Can you come in and have a look?
So what that really kind of says to me is that currently with the ISO 19650 series in part 1 and 2 being currently released, and within other countries outside of the UK, there really isn't a standard that's in place to align with this at this point in time. It clearly through the commentary that you've just kind of worked through is there's a fair level of importance to this new ISO standard that will come out in the next 12 to 18 months, and that clients should really take this standard into consideration if they are considering actually implementing processes under ISO 19650 Part 1 and 2.
Absolutely. I would strongly recommend, no matter what asset any client is going to be carrying out a BIM project on, is read the full suite of documents, because they complement each other. Part 5 will point to part 2 and part 3. It will also point to other standards in terms of quality control, in terms of ISO 27001, which is an information security management system. So it really informs the asset owner at the beginning, and that's the key thing. At the beginning of the project or the program, what they should think about doing. And quite importantly for me, what we very, very often see is clients calling us in saying, we've read through the PAS, we think we need to have a chat. And there'll be a detailed design stage, or in a lot of cases, they've actually started to build the asset. And it's kind of like, so what do you want me to achieve now? You've already procured your supply chain. You've already procured and set up your common data environment and the systems and software that will run your BIM project. You're already collaborating with lots of different organizations and lots of different suppliers. What do you want me to achieve? And it's actually very difficult to kind of bring in the whole BIM security piece later on. It really needs to be thought about at the beginning to get the maximum effect with it, and that's where a lot of organisations go wrong. They shoot down the 1, 2, 3 area without considering 5, and 5 really does underpin and support what they want to achieve in terms of a true security-minded approach to collaboration.
This might be a slightly pointed question, or it might not be, I don't know, but are there actually many people that are actually truly capable of providing advice under this standard? Because, if a client came and had a chat to me, there's no way in the world I think I'd be able to ever service them. It's just interesting to know whether or not there are enough people out there that have that expertise like yourself, because, not many people have 23 years experience in dealing with top secret international correspondence. But you know what I mean? It's interesting in terms of, are there many people technically capable to understand, I guess, the IT component of it, but also then on the other side of it, understand, the difference between a critical asset and a non-critical asset, like for example, a fiber optic cable or the like.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I think so. Talking from a UK point of view, which is probably easier for me at the moment.
Yep.
So the UK is quite mature in terms of its BIM journey. As I mentioned earlier, it's mandatory on public spending, so public projects and programs. We've got quite a mature, or a very mature, organisation that looks at our critical national infrastructure. But in terms of BIM security, you're really looking at some quite unique skill sets. What isn't required is a deep, in-depth knowledge of construction, and I think that's kind of justified and highlighted by my background. What is required is an understanding of how data flows around systems, how that can be protected from a physical point of view, and how that can be protected from a cyber point of view. My team are all are all ex-military for good reasons. They've all worked in very sensitive backgrounds for good reasons, and they all have skills, whether that be a cyber, physical, or data kind of background, that actually enhance and pull together a holistic service offering. In terms of other people, so there are other organisations who do this. We're quite unique in the terms of that we use ex-military people, and I think there's a justified reason for that. That's not to say I wouldn't recruit non-ex-military. It's just because they tick all the boxes for me in terms of security clearance and skills and training. So there are other organisations in the UK who do this, but we seem to be quite lucky in terms of that we're working on some of the biggest programs within the UK.
Yeah, I'm guessing though that the majority of these kind of experts would probably kind of be the type of people that provide data security for banks. Like that, is that the kind of commonality?
It is, but having good security when you're opening that and allowing people in to see that information and sharing that information quite openly is quite difficult. Mm-hmm. So, I don't recruit security people per se. I recruit people who have worked within sensitive organizations and have had to share information with other organizations, because that is a subtle and a slightly different skill set. It's definitely a different mindset, because you're constantly asking the question, before I click this mouse button, before I open this meeting, before I open this call, before I share this information, you're constantly asking the question, is there anything else I need to do? Do I need to ask any questions? Are there any checks and balances that should be in place before I share this document? And it's just a mindset that is ingrained in you because of the background that these people have been involved in. So it's not just about employing people who understand data security or cyber security, et cetera. It's about employing people and utilizing people who can do that, but also understand the nuances of being able to share and collaborate as well. So it's a very subtle but important difference, securing things, but then opening up the security barriers.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of takes me on to this possibly maybe easy question or challenging question. And for most of the people that would be listening today as asset owners, they'd have probably in their possession now, they'd have a large storeroom. They'll have heaps and heaps of their paper records or records of discs, on DVDs or CDs of some sort. And, people need physical access to this single point, which is normally just a single point, or if they have multiple assets, they might have a storeroom in each one of these assets. And all that's secured by by a key. And, most of the time, people wouldn't actually frequent this resource, and they're not frequenting the resource because of the problem of having key, but it's probably more to do with the fact that the information's probably too hard to find. So the reason why people are going to a digital solution is to try and make the information easier to find and make it a bit more accessible. And in that instance, when it's put on that digital environment, if it's not accessible or easy to get their hands on, people won't bother. Taking into consideration, your whole point here, and I guess the reason why we're having the conversation today, how can you make data secure so it can't be obtained by unwanted people, but then make it accessible for those that may need it? And it could be a question. It could be an answer that might be a dictionary or a very long-winded answer, but it could be a short one as well.
We, as in Turner and Townsend, do a lot of digital transformation projects globally. I was involved in one in South America last year. So taking that traditional, storage room full of lots of documents that no one really knows what's in there and probably doesn't read anyway, and bringing that into the digital world and making it much more accessible. People get really uncomfortable, nervous, scared, twitchy, whatever you want to, explain it as in terms of putting stuff in IT systems, particularly when people start talking about the cloud. But actually, the technology has progressed so much more quickly than lots of other areas of construction in terms of having information accessible and secure and secured is actually quite straightforward and quite simple. I think with all of this, nothing is 100%. If any organisation thinks that their information is 100% secure 365 days a year, they've got it all wrong. The most secure organisations in the world will always be challenging themselves and always bringing in new technology and always looking for the weak link. So by an organisation securing an IT system, putting some good cyber health and some good cyber systems around it, putting all this information on, and then assuming that it's 100% secure is actually quite naive. There's a reason why all of the large IT companies, Microsoft, Apple, whoever, are always releasing firmware and software updates, because most of the time that will involve getting rid of security weaknesses. I think what's important is to understand from the beginning what the asset owner needs to access, who needs to access it, when they need to access it, and where they need to access it from. So if there was, for example, a person or individual who is working on a project, quite legitimately, but they don't have the necessary security clearance or background checks or whatever in place for them to see sensitive documents, then as long as the system is set up correctly and the documents are named correctly and the metadata is there, then that person will be able to open that document. Another example is we employ systems that sit on the network, and we can see exactly who is accessing what, via what systems, what files they're sending, and we can set up different flags and notifications. So if an organization, for example, one of our suppliers on a project is using Dropbox or Google Drive and not using the common data environment, we can see that, and we can then go to the supplier and say, you're using Google Drive or you're using Dropbox or whatever file sharing software. That's not our approved common data environment. It hasn't gone through our governance, our checks and balances, our pen testing or whatever. We would like to stop using it. And we can still then monitor if they carry on to use it. And then that might be a case of, okay, you're using Google Drive. Why? What does Google Drive do for you that our common data environment doesn't? Yeah. Or we could just block it. And that comes down to, what's written in the contract, what's written in the T's and C's, et cetera, et cetera. So you can start to see there is a holistic point of view that needs to be taken about BIM security. What do you want your suppliers and how do you want your suppliers to collaborate, and how do you not want them to collaborate? Probably more importantly, on the not side, that needs to be made quite clear in the invitation to tender, in the pre-qualification questionnaire, in the request for proposal, in supplier interviews, in contracts, in terms and conditions, in non-disclosure agreements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if the supplier or the organization you're working with does then start sending data where it shouldn't be sent, that might be to a home Google Mail or a Hotmail account or to an organization that's not supposed to, and we can see that, we've got some contractual agreements, some terms and conditions, and an NDA in place that quite specifically cover that. And then clearly it's up to the asset owner of what that journey is going to be in terms of whether there's a fine, whether they're removed from the project or whatever. So to go back to your original question, if organizations are still using paper copies in filing cabinets in strong rooms, then they're probably about 20 years behind. No design team designs in 2D anymore, and they haven't done for quite some time. And I think that's quite an interesting point, because what you will see, and what we see quite a lot, is designers saying, if you're going to use BIM, that's going to increase the cost by 10%. And straight away our team would go back and say, why? Because you're using the tools anyway. Yes. BIM is a process about, fundamentally the good use of data and having the data associated with in the right place at the right time for the right people to see. It's not about spending a fortune on Autodesk licensing or whatever, because that will already be in place. The designers will already have that. So everyone's designing in 3D anyway. I still find it amazing that in some contracts, the deliverable is a 2D plan. We still see that, even in the UK today. So everyone's designing using IT systems. So why can't the information be captured and retained on IT systems? And as long as that is thought through at the beginning of the project, before you start sharing and collaborating, actually, it can be a very secure, very robust way of doing things. And it adds the benefit of putting the power back into the client's hands of understanding exactly what is going on, where, with who, and why. And you won't get that in a filing cabinet with 2D drawings.
Yeah, I know. You won't know when someone goes into that filing cabinet. But I guess there's a couple of more questions I've got to close this discussion out. I guess, is there any difference between having your asset or common data environment or your asset management, if you're looking at the end of the project when it's actually in operations? Is there any challenges or differences between having a cloud-based environment where it's all located on another external server to your organization versus having it connected locally?
No, and it's interesting. We're starting to see a bit of a shift from on-prem solutions to cloud solutions, even within the UK government. And the UK government does use cloud, up to a fairly sensitive level.
Yep.
What needs to happen is there's pros and cons on both sides. But where our clients have used suppliers that use on-prem solution because the client doesn't want to use cloud for whatever reason. So my team for on-prem solutions we would go to the architect's office, the engineering design team's office, the M&E office, whatever that may be. And we would say, we would carry out a physical security assessment, but show me your server room, show me your rack, show me where this on-prem solution is hosted. And we then walk backwards. So we're looking at, we call it within the security world, kind of the onion layer effect. How many layers of the onion are protecting the core? And the more layers there are, basically, the secure the core is. Yes. And if you think of the core as the on-prem solution, what layers of security go around that? And more often than not, the layers of security that surround that on-prem solution are very, very weak. Whether that's poor CCTV, poor access control, poor key management, the server room is shared with the photocopier and the cleaner, the hub, the cabinets aren't locked, there's no real patch management, there's no cable management, etc., etc. When you go to a cloud environment, as long as you've done your homework, it's completely the other end of the scale. So you take Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services or whatever, they are immensely secure, immensely robust data centers with lots of backup power, backup connectivity, lots of physical security, lots of cyber security, lots of redundancy. So if you put those two options to a client and say, that's what you're currently doing, and those are the risks, this is what you could be doing, and there's very few risks, nothing's 100%. Most clients will go, actually, we want to move to the cloud. The thing to understand with the cloud is what that actually means. So, when people say it's in the cloud, it's in a data center, it's in a server, it's on some equipment somewhere. It exists in a physical or virtual world somewhere. And it's really, really important to understand where that somewhere is. So, for example, for a lot of our clients, they will insist that the data centers need to be within the UK or maybe within the EU. There's quite often, or there should be, a backup data center. How does that connect? And if the primary data center goes down, how quickly can the secondary data center bring up the solution that the client is paying for? And quite often, that's not immediate. It can be days. So understanding the whole cloud piece, what that is, where that is, how it's accessed, and when you click your button on your mouse, what does that actually mean is really important. So from a UK C&I point of view, from a critical national infrastructure point of view, for any C&I project, that the asset owner is encouraged to go to the data center and do a full survey. So my team does that quite a lot. So we'll go to data centers, we'll set up a proper visit, and we'll be escorted around the data center and the data hall. we will go to the racks where our solutions will be hosted, and then using the kind of onion layer effect, work our way out to look at how do cleaners get in, what CCTV is looking over the racks, what extra security can we put on those racks? Is it a shared solution? So actually a lot of software providers will have a particular solution on a virtual machine. So your environment is shared on a server with 2, 3, 4 other different asset owners. Does the client want that? What does that actually mean from a technical point of view and from a risk point of view and from a cost point of view? So there's lots of different questions about, do I go on-prem, do I go cloud? What I will say is a lot of the really interesting and powerful cyber tools probably work better in a cloud environment than they do on-prem, because you can put it right at the Active Directory level, right at the very, very top, and you can see everything that's flowing in and flowing out. Most people use the internet now, so by having it in the cloud, it's quite easy to set up some quite interesting tools to inform the client of exactly what's going on. When it's on-prem, yes, it could be more easier to secure, although that is rarely the case. It's very, very often not that secure, but then you're quite limited to what you want to do in terms of understanding when someone clicks send, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, and I guess follows to my last question. Here in Australia, our government agencies, whenever we have projects where any work is going to be undertaken on them and there's going to be data stored or transferred, it's all about data sovereignty and having that data actually located within Australia, and there's no opportunities that data is going to be stored offshore, because obviously then there's risk from other countries, I guess, potentially accessing that information that they don't want to have access it, where a government possibly could just go and raid one of these data centers. Is that something that can happen?
Yes. Data sovereignty is a concern. I would say a concern. It's something that needs to be considered. Whether that's from a large tier one contractor hosting lots of information for the asset owner, for the client overseas, and then that tier one contractor going bankrupt. Trying to get that data back from the data center will be immensely difficult unless the T's and C's, the SLAs, the contracts, etc., are very cleverly and quite clearly drawn up, which is very rarely the case. We do see concerns from not only a contractor going bankrupt and the client getting that information back, but also from, let's say, other governments having the ability to delve into that information and find out what the asset owner, what the client is actually doing. There are pros and cons of keeping stuff nationally and moving it overseas. For example, in the UK, generally hosting stuff overseas is about 30% cheaper.
Yeah.
So if there's not a risk to the client, or if the client's prepared to take that risk because it might not be a particularly sensitive asset or whatever, or they're using a supplier that they've used for years, they're very well financially set, then actually go and put it somewhere else because you're saving yourself 30%. As long as some basics like encryption or that kind of good stuff is put in place.
It's the final question. It's the one question I ask every one of my guests. But the thing is, I'm actually most interested with your answer in this one compared to my other guests, and because of your background and where you've come from. But Nathan, what does BIM mean to you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So because my background isn't construction or focused, design focused or whatever, to me, BIM fundamentally is about the sharing of information. And I get really frustrated when organizations and suppliers try to make it more complex than what it actually is. It's about agreeing a set of standards, a set of protocols, so that the asset owner will get the absolute most out of the entire construction process, the design, the build, the operations, and the decommissioning of that asset. Data is everything now. It's immensely powerful, and if it's used correctly, can make buildings much more efficient, whether that's from an environmental impact or whether that's from a cost impact. It informs the client of how the building is going to work and how it's actually going to live and breathe. And then any security or any environmental concerns that need to be taken into consideration when the building is decommissioned. BIM to me is, if I was to sum it up in one word, it's about collaboration. But it's understanding how BIM can support a number of other ideas, agendas, schemes, if you like, around smart buildings, smart cities, smart communities. And I think there are absolutely some synergies between what BIM can do, what it will be able to do in the future, and how it can enhance our built environment.
Now, Nathan, I think that this session has been probably one of the most interesting ones for me, because it's one of the things, or one of the areas that I actually believe that would probably be forgotten by many people that were considering this as part of their BIM journey, and actually kind of understanding that there is a high level of importance to data security. But on the flip side, I think it might actually possibly even open up the questions for clients to actually start to consider a high level of interest in the data security they have and actually operating their business. So it's actually kind of possibly a twofold benefit. But mate, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, no, not at all. I think, my closing comment would be, and I hear it and see it with every client, is when you start to talk about BIM security, they will say, no, we've got our own security team, we've got our own IT security team, we've got our own physical security team, we don't need to worry about BIM security. And then when I explain to them what BIM security actually is, and we've actually done a couple of videos using Celebri software, which we've actually gone out and found within the BIM model security risks on designs that were literally just about to be signed off and be built, then you start to get the client's attention. So the biggest blocker we have from a BIM security point of view is the client or the asset owner assumes that its existing security team are already doing it. That is never the case, and we always work alongside the existing security teams, whether that be cyber, physical, or data, but bring in the BIM capability, which is subtly different, which I've hopefully spoke about during this podcast, to then support the existing security team throughout their BIM journey.
Thanks once again, Nathan, for your time. For more information on Nathan and the topic we discussed today, please head to our website for further reading. I look forward to sharing our next podcast in a fortnight's time. Until then, good luck with your digital transition. For more information, or if you'd like to continue the discussion in the comments section, head over to our website, thedigitaltransition.com. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on our future podcasts. The Digital Transition.